All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. I am with Chris Hanna. Chris, you are an ex-Mormon. I'm going to let you self-describe, self-identify here in a minute. But you had come across, I think it was a few months ago, originally a Facebook post that kind of was talking about some of the things I was talking about with critical theory, critical race theory online. I think it was in an ex-Mormon kind of chat room, Facebook group maybe. And my understanding is you actually ended up starting to support what I was saying in there. And that kind of had a little ripple effect. But I think that's originally where you and I kind of connected from.
Yeah, definitely. I saw somebody putting up a post saying, listen to what this guy is saying. The stuff he's talking about is crazy about this critical race theory. And I actually have a background in the stuff and have read a lot of it like you have. I didn't know you before the post was put up. Mm-hmm. And I watched the video. And I said, he's right. Everything he says right. It's just correct. And so then I started defending you on the post in this ex-Mormon forum. And it turned into a swarm of gnats, as I usually call it, because I've actually been through it a lot of different times. If you're somebody who pushes back on anything like this, yes. And through that pushback, I got noticed by Jonathan Streeter, who has another ex-Mormon channel, and he brought me on to talk about different things. And then from there, I got brought on to the Midnight Mormons to talk about some things. And all this mostly stems back to that I was actually exposed to these ideas in graduate school, and I went to lit graduate school in an MA in literature and Spanish back in the 2000s, and I'd been exposed to some of the direct CRT stuff as far back as in the 2000, 2004, 2005, and I'd kept up with it ever since because I was interested, as you are, in the continuous strange development of I guess what you call wokeness. They called themselves wokeness. People get upset when you use that term. It used to call itself wokeness around 2010, 2011. There's even some academic papers that say that. And I was real impressed. I was impressed that you'd done the reading, because so often when I see the critics or the screechers come out about it, I only have to poke at it a little bit to find out that they haven't done any of the reading, mm-hmm. Most of the defenders of it. And almost everything I've ever... I can't say I've listened to, I think, everything you've done. And I haven't pulled out a point where you've gone off or been off base. Yeah.
I'm sure there's some that are off base, but yeah, appreciate that. So give us a little bit of a background on yourself. So you went on a mission. I think you went to Mexico City.
Yeah.
I went to Mexico City. Okay. So we've got that connection too. So you went to Mexico City on a mission. You went in, then you went to the U, right? University of Utah.
University of Utah. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about kind of that part of your journey there where postmodernism, because you were a lit major.
Yeah. So why postmodernism?
Talk to us about what this was and how you met postmodernism.
I had that question myself. I had that same question in graduate school, 2003, 4, 5. I was at the University of Utah. I was in. One of these ladies from the September 6th, she was in an office right next to me there. She's been kind of busy in the news lately. I wish I remembered her name. But anyway, the postmodernism was a confusion to me too. I did the undergraduate in Spanish literature as a second major. That only happened on accident because the way school is set up, it took too much time to get through my whole entire other major. That I couldn't line up the classes. So I ended up getting more Spanish classes in as so much of us post-Spanish speakers, take Spanish as a second thing. My main degree was in public relations, which is kind of a joke because at that time frame, the whole entire thing of public relations was learning how to apologize about stuff. Honestly, it was. It's just here's how corporate places apologize. So that's kind of become a big thing too. But when I graduated, when I didn't finish that, it took too long to finish that. I graduated in double major in Spanish. When I graduated top of the class, not to brag about it. And I also have a bone to pick with that because I don't think it means anything, because I do think the universities have gotten more lax on how they grade. All you have to do is show up. But anyway, I graduated top of the class, so I got invited. to come on as a TA. And and continue. You know, it was kind of like a scholarship through my doctorate if I wanted to teach at the University of Utah. I taught undergraduate classes and did the MA in Spanish literature. And it wasn't until graduate school that suddenly there was a hard jag into postmodernism.
So what year is this going into grad school?
2003, 2004. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what hit me. I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know what the heck everybody was talking about. I didn't understand this concept that we were supposed to read all of these papers through a lens, and that lens was supposed to be either Foucault or Lacan or Derrida or Marx. You could do a Marxist reading of everything. I mean, back then they weren't shying off of just using, the term Marx, or you could do a feminist reading. You were supposed to read everything just nakedly through a lens. And I'd go around, because being confused about it, I'd go around to different teachers' office and say, what's going on? Like, why do we have to do this? What's the angle? And I'd kind of get the excuse that, well, that's the way you can make it new, or you can make it your own, because everything's already been written classically about them. So it's, that was one of the answers. Secondly, I really felt like a lot of those professors themselves at that time frame didn't understand postmodernism themselves. So I'd ask them, and I'd kind of get blank stares. And I was as confused as anybody of, why am I reading French philosophers and not Quixote? Why, what's going on here? And I'd go around and ask. And part of me is, I felt like maybe I'm behind. Maybe I'm the one who doesn't get it. You're a young kid, you know what I mean? And you have all these people at that time frame. I had a lot more respect for the ethos of what professor meant. And I thought it meant that, I couldn't argue with it. They must know something I don't know, Mm-hmm. And so I'd go around and read and I'd try to find books that would sum it up, but there was nothing to sum it up at that time. Postmodernism at that time, over the years, it's gotten more and more plain in its speaking. At that time, the jargon was just impenetrable. And I thought it was especially ridiculous just to have like a young kid just sit there trying to poke through Foucault and Derrida or Judith Butler themselves, which is kind of funny, because I think if you read Judith Butler today, this is how far we've all come. I think a lot of people would kind of understand it. But in 2004, 2005, it was complete jargon. If I said cis hetero, phallogocentric, whatever, nobody would have understood that in 2005. I say, what's this academic jargon you're speaking? And nowadays, I think a lot of people know what that means.
Yeah, so a whole new language was presented to you.
Yeah. So I actually, when I ended up getting out and moving away from Mormonism, I used to kind of brag that I did it philosophically. It didn't have to do with history. It didn't have to do with it was kind of more like a Foucauldian view of power structures and all that sorts of stuff. And I thought it sounded intelligent or something like that, But I went through like a little bit of a period of reading different things about the history and find that sort of stuff out. But then there's also, different things that happen in the personal life and whatnot. But I actually didn't really leave the church like at that moment. I actually left later, sometime around the time when John DeLynn and Kate Kelly got excommunicated. And at that moment, I think I very errantly viewed that as the church saying, we don't want half in, half out people,
2014
ish. Yeah. But and I'd been trying to work out. I'd been dating. I'd continued to date, and I mean, I think I was by the whole entire time, remaining temple worthy, all that sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't work out just my issues of resolving it and not being able to figure it out. And then I kind of viewed at that moment, like I said, I think it's errantly, because more time has passed since then and a lot of wildness has happened since then. And I'm talking, nationally and all that. But it was kind of just more thinking that I thought the church was drawing the line that, like, no spit out the lukewarm, what I mean? No half in, half out. One of the reasons I think that's errantly is because I didn't understand at that time frame that I thought John DeLynn was trying to help people remain prog Mormons. I think that's totally wrong. I think the church was right in that he was a wolf in sheep's clothing the whole entire time. Well, we know that because he's now come out.
We know that now pretty blatantly. Yeah,
he's admitted it too.
So when you were, just a quick question. So when you left the church, it was okay. Am I not wanted here? Is this, because of the way I am and the way I'm thinking? Is it because I'm not wanted here? And this is kind of a spiritual question, but what's your relationship like with God at that time?
Oh, I mean, I guess I wasn't doing it that way. You know what I mean? Okay. I was thinking more academically academically, I was trying to sort it out. I guess I still do. Cause still nowadays in a Petersonian type of way, I'll make arguments for the church, but it's still coming from an academic angle. It's still coming from.
Talking about Jordan Peterson,
yeah. Like coming from an angle of making sense of it all, maybe in a anthropological or
very practical,
evolutionary way, practical way, or as he'll new pragmatism. The William James type stuff and C.S. Pierce, but I've also listened to a whole lot since then. I mean, we're already jumping way in the future, but I mean, I listen to different guys. The internet's been huge to help me with people like with Pajot, or I'll listen to Paul Vanderklay. These guys aren't Mormons, but I'll listen to you, and I'll listen to a few other Mormon podcasts, the Midnight Mormons. I'll listen to anybody, and I think I'm grasping a lot of those concepts a little bit differently, getting explained a bit differently than they used to be. I think one of the interesting things that's happened to me is I do think across this time frame is that the arguers for the positive sides of the religious stuff have gotten a lot better. I mean, they've sharpened their knives, and I think they are doing better. I think across the board, they really are. They're making better arguments all over the place.
Well, I think you're a lot like me in the way you think that way, because I'm actually very much that way. I need pragmatism. I've got to have that. Now, I don't have to have it. I guess I can feel like I don't have to have all of the evidence, and I may not even have to go through the practice of it yet. I have a buffer of faith, let's say, right, that's there for a while that I can use and lean on while I'm trying to go through something that I feel needs to become practical for me. I need that pragmatism. I really do. So I try to approach it that way. I think you do the same kind of thing. I want to see the truth in the principles. I want to see the representation of this in how it plays out and manifests in our life and in our reality. And instead of, I think there's oftentimes this thought, and I think it's regurgitated in a lot of religion, of this idea of faith just being belief, right? It's just like this belief, and you either have the belief or you don't have the belief, instead of, to me, it's trust, right? Which is, I can trust you up to a certain amount. I've been to dinner with you. I've talked to you a little bit, but we don't have a huge relationship yet. So I've got some trust I can put out there, but there's not a great amount of trust, and that can't be faked, right? I can't fake the trust. I can pretend it's there, but there's, you can't really. The trust comes from, to me, that practicality,
the proofs over time,
the proof over time of experience through using those principles. And then if I can rely on that, then that to me is faith, right? That it's, and I think that, maybe, I don't know if that's what you're saying with the arguments, that they're getting more toward a practical side where that combination of belief and practicality might come in. But I think it's a big mistake for people that argue for religion and for the existence of God to just focus on just this idea of belief. I think it's I think it's a vacuum, honestly. And I don't think that's religion anyway. I don't think that you can just have a belief.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
It makes a ton of sense to me. Pragmatism makes a lot of sense to me. It's a lot of some of the best arguments that I see for it. Not that everything's supposed to be an argument, because I think some of these same people have made the argument to me that sometimes, especially like Jonathan Pajot will make the description of inside of like a church. He uses symbolism and visuals for it, but he says at the front of the church, there's going to be different people than the ones who are at the doorways and who are at the pews and who are at the back of the church. And the one at the front of the church has got to be a believer. You know what I mean? Like, you can't have somebody up there who's just doing it for pragmatics. And I think that's probably true. But I think everybody, maybe, you know, down the line of it, you know, some people might just be trying to make sense of it. And one of the concepts I heard lately is one of the big things ex-Mormons talk about is shelves and shelves breaking. And somebody pointed out that you put stuff on your shelf for everything. There's nothing in your life where you don't have to like stop and hear something that doesn't quite fit into your paradigm. So now you got to put something on the shelf about that and think it out and try to wait on it and see what happens and think about it harder or see how it plays out. And a lot of those different ideas make a lot of sense to me. So, I mean, I get that I think belief has to be in there for something to work in a gelled way, not to get too back into academics about it, because the academics are partially, I'll lean on them, and at the same time, they drive me nuts and I can't stand them, especially like all the philosophy. I mean, I'm pretty well read in a lot of different philosophers, and I dislike them all, but I can use them all or think about them all. But I mean, that's just kind of joking. But so Durkheim talked a lot about, he was the father of sociology. And one of the main things he was obsessed about and studied was how religion is the thing that gels a community together. And there's never been a replacement for that in history. Well, that hasn't gone wild or wrong, you know what I mean? But I think a lot of people in the post-Mormon, ex-Mormon, atheistic world have realized that there's a truth to that, and it hit them in the face fast. It hit them in the face fast with just kind of these 20 years of this new atheism that's kind of come out, that they realize that we can't hold this together. We can't gel together. We can't be as one, no matter what. We all start eating each other up and dividing each other up, and we can't build together any sort of organization. Some people might remember like the atheism movement, the new atheism movement, the Dawkins, Harris, Dennett, and Hitchens movement. Yeah, like in 2006-7, it blew up, and it blew up because of wokeness. It turned into atheism plus, where they realized that we've got to make kind of a religion out of this. It's got to have a moral to it. And then as soon as they started doing that, there was all this infighting and purity spiraling, and they ate each other up, and it just destroyed itself. And
but isn't that still where that world is? Isn't it still in that woke world?
It never broke, it never figured it out. It just, and to me, it almost is like it destroys itself through like purity spiral. And you can watch it happen. To be critical beforehand, John DeLynn is creating this Thrive organization, which a lot of people point at and say, that's a religion. Says, no, it's not a religion. It's not a religion. Well, I can still just look at it and say, it's going to blow up. Why do I know it's going to blow up? Well, they already had a couple things where they said, we just cancel this whole thing, or we're getting too much complaints, or we're getting too much stuff. But the reason why we know it's going to blow up is because we've been there. I've been there in humanities departments when the mustard seeds of like wokeness starts and it just takes over. We've watched it happen through the atheism movement, where it just blew everything up. We watched it happen. It's not being Nostradamus anymore. It's just what happens. They get into these places and they suddenly realize that they're not gelling together, or that they need to create some sort of moral, and they can't just snap it out of the air and invent it themselves, because you don't have the pragmatic test of time of the ones that have worked. And
so is there then, let's look at this then. So because you've noticed this, and you've been in that world, right? But you're not, your background where you've been able to immerse yourself in the writings of critical theory, postmodernism, etc., some philosophy, but what you've pushed back on that.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is that a big divide in that world right now? Or is it just, are you pretty much a minority then?
I'm a minority. It's not a divide because there's not enough for there to be a divide. And some of the people who might be with me on it are pretty quiet about it, or kind of like hinting it out there, or not afraid to say anything, or like me and another friend of mine were kicked off of everything. As soon as we start pushing back, or if we say, no, Greg's right, what he said there is right, we'll get booted in a second. But not that every single one of them has booted me off, but it's happened. So I have background with some of the famous podcasters in ex-Mormonism. I grew up in the same ward as Lindsay Hansen Park. I was friends with her around the start of her whole entire podcasting movement and all that sorts of stuff. I used to help her over at Sunstone, those types of things.
Is she still over there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
But right now she's the consultant on Under the Banner of Heaven.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, she's the historical consultant. She did that Year of Polygamy thing, got noticed in the New York Times for it and all that stuff. I had a falling out with her and with John Larson, another famous podcaster. He was on with John DeLynn all the time. And not that I was ever super close with him or anything, but the politics and the wokeness that just started becoming a demand inside the ex-Mormon world became, to me, worse. So many ex-Mormons have a story of their post-Mormon story of like, and then I realized that it was all this thing, and I realized it's fake, and I had this exit story. To me, in my life, the exit story of the religion of academia is the big story of that. That's where the thing I feel like that's where I found out all these guys who say they were the prophets of knowing everything, like Foucault and Butler, were just pulling assertions out of the clean, cold air and sticking them into everybody's heads as if they were some sort of scientific thing because they're called PhD, and making a whole, I don't know, it's worldwide, almost the entire West buy into these things that are not based in anything that's even close to reality. And it's based a lot in cynicism. And I really got irritated with it. And the thing is, what was strange is I was ahead of the game on most of these people. I was a guest writer on Feminist Mormon Housewives one time. And it's like 2011, 12. And that movie, The Help, came out. And then the guest thing, I wrote them about it, and I said, "You guys realize that this centers white women as the heroes of the Black women in the South, right? You realize that this is going to get canceled, right? You got to realize what you're doing and saying here." And there was some pushback on, like, "What are you talking about? I like that movie. That was a good movie," because at that time frame, it was okay to like that movie.
Right, yeah.
And then, of course, several years later, it's come out that everybody who was in it denounced it because it was upsetting, because it centered white women at the center of the battle of whatever. Right. It was an appropriation and all that sorts of stuff. And I started noticing, because I know for a fact that they weren't woke at first, and then I watched it happen, and I watched it slowly just get.
How do you think that happens? I mean, really, how does that happen? I mean, because to me, we can look at wokeness, and you and I kind of know about the whole metaphor of the virus and everything from language and postmodernism and the idea of praxis with critical theory. And is that what it is? Do you think? Is it just kind of enters in, and as the language enters in, as the ideas enter in to anywhere, it's pregnant with this. I almost want to say an element of conversion.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's like you either how long can you stay in this group that's now being affected with all of this and not be converted? It's kind of like you in the group of ex-Mormons. I mean, can you stay in this and not get baptized into wokeness?
No. And like I said, especially if you're in the online world, you either conform with the Borg or you're out. I mean, really, on every one of those pages, they just get taken over. But you watch it with anywhere, it's how the same thing happened. You might have followed what happened with Gamergate or Comicsgate. There's all these different things where they tried to infiltrate these places, and then of course those places pushed back at all. They got labeled every white supremacist, white ring, whatever, and they do have a bit of tactics of barging in and moving in by saying you've got to be inclusive, you got to be diverse, you got to have equity, you got to put this person in charge, you got to, as James Lindsay might call it, says you call everything racist until you own it. But the part of the deal is there's just learned techniques that you don't even have to get heavily trained in, they're kind of takeover techniques. I mean, it's Marxist conflict theory. I mean, everybody who tries to run and hide that this is Marxism just hasn't read it well enough. It is a type of Marxism, just trading out some of the X's and the O's, And
that's let me just interrupt you. To me, that's the biggest Mott and Bailey of all of this wokeness. It is front and center Mott and Bailey of I'm going to go out and if I'm facing way out on the edges, there's no Marxism involved with this. right? It's like last summer you had Kimberly Crenshaw, who was interviewed on MSNBC,
Yeah.
and she was asked by, is it April? What's her name? Do you know?
No, it was Gail. Gail? No. What's her name?
I thought it was April Reed.
Nope.
Is it?
It's I know the exact clip. It's a Joy Reid.
Joy Reid. That's it. Yeah, Joy Reid. She's interviewed by Joy, and Joy says, boy, people say that, because just for those that don't know, Kimberly Crenshaw is the one who coined the term critical race theory and later intersectionality. And Joy Reid asks her on TV, all these people say this is Marxist and Marxism, but it's not, is it? And she doesn't answer.
She just avoids the question.
She just avoids the question completely. And it's funny because if you later look at the clip on YouTube, the title of it is something to the effect of Kimberly Crenshaw denies Marxism in CRT.
It's so funny because if you buy Kimberly Crenshaw's book, Critical Race Theory, it's like 600 pages. It's a hard read. It's an annoying read, but you don't have to read all of it. It's all just in the intro. She just says it all in the intro. Yeah. That yes, we started with the critical legal studies, which were a bunch of Marxists. We were a bunch of Marxists, and we split off from the vulgar Marxists to form our new Marxism that included concepts like race. It's all just right in there, and they say it right and open. And you, Greg, are crazy for repeating it.
Yeah, exactly. You're crazy. Unless, yeah, I'm crazy, but if she's on the inside, then everybody's on a board. You know what I'm saying? That's the Mott and Bailey. And if you're inside, everybody knows. It's the inside secret. It's like the inside handshake. It's like the Marxist handshake for everybody.
It's so true of postmodernism too. It's like you cannot describe postmodernism unless you agree with it. But if you're critical of it in any way, you didn't describe it right.
Yeah.
And that's just how that goes. But I remember there was the debate between Zizek and Peterson, and Zizek in the debate, everybody all over the internet thinks
Zizek is a Marxist.
He's a postmodern neo-Marxist.
Yes, exactly.
The reason I'll say that is that's part of the point I was making is Jordan Peterson caught a lot of flack for bringing up that term. I always kind of called it the nothing, like from Neverending Story. It's the nothing because there was no name. There was like kind of no term for the new thing that was evolving out of it. But when Peterson called it that, it kind of gave it a name. And of course, they started saying, no, it's not that. It's not that. But Zizek, everybody thinks Zizek had this moment where he owned Peterson, where he goes, where are these Marxists and these postmodern neo-Marxists? And I say, it's you, Zizek. You are a self-proclaimed Marxist who reads everything through Lacan and Deleuze, who are postmodernists. You know the game that you're playing. You're sitting there right in front of them, throwing sand in the eyes, and he's one of them but he's not the worst of them. Crenshaw openly admits to incorporating Derrida into her work and using Foucault for her. The concept of intersectionality is so obviously Foucauldian, and people call queer theory. They call Foucault the grandfather of queer theory. It's
well, and you see how much it's the pervasiveness of it in academia, right? Foucault is the number one cited scholar in all of academia in the U.S.
Yeah. It's not one book. It's not two books. It's not three books. It's libraries and libraries and libraries and libraries and libraries of proof. And you just have to read them. And if you go out and say, hey, I read this, you get called a crazy person. And that's academia today. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's one of the reasons why I feel like the big religious fallout I had in my life wasn't the Mormon change. It was the leaving academia change. And
my belief, and tell me what you think about this. For me, I know that in the past you've had issues with, there's still this focus, obviously, especially when you look at something like Under the Banner of Heaven, right? Where have you seen any of that?
Yep.
Okay. So they keep going. They go to these flashbacks, right? And so they go back.
Heavenly Father knows.
Yeah. The Mountain Meadows Massacre and all this stuff. Right. And there's this eerie music playing and everything. But anyway, that I think, and you look at like the CES letter and the Book of Abraham and how was, the Joseph Smith with a hat and all these different things. I don't think I don't think today even that is the number one reason for people leaving the church.
No.
I think it has been in the past.
It has been, and it didn't work very well.
It didn't work very well. And there's, I don't think people realize this. And I don't even know if the church realizes this, but to me, it's the conversion into, we can call it identitarianism. We can call it wokeness. We can, it's a conversion into a new world. And so it looks to me like, and maybe I'm wrong, tell me what you think. It looks to me like between the relationship, let's call it between TBMs, right? Which I would be, right? And agnostics or atheists or post-Mormons, like you would be. In a lot of cases, it's to some degree, there's wokeness against anti-wokeness, or it's becoming more and more that. There's obviously a lot of woke individuals within the church and non-woke people outside of the church or post-Mormon, but that seems to be more and more to me a dividing line.
Yeah, it's making strange bedfellows. I mean, like us, things are getting mixed and switched around, and some of the issue with that too is that there's been a lot of people in the atheist or ex-religious world who are rethinking their hubris, of thinking that we could go reinvent morality and redo this stuff. And that's part of why Peterson actually spoke a lot to me about that. And you bring up Peterson's name, there's a lot of like different baggage with it. But to me, he really spoke to me about, initially I appreciated that he just stood up for stuff. I appreciate anybody who stands up for something that they just see as real and true, like you. I see this, I'm just going to say what it is. And that's all there is to it. I see it and I'm going to say it. But that's when I started listening to him. And then he made me start to rethink the concepts of the hubris of thinking that you can outthink or outdo religions that have big, long track records or big, long histories of by the fruits you shall know them. And a lot of people will bring that up as like, that's some sort of fallacy. I don't think it's a fallacy. I think there is a truth in that, a pragmatic truth in that. And I mean, that's what the ultimate concept of pragmatism is. But he spoke to me a lot about rethinking how much we could just go reinvent stuff, and how Jonathan Haidt's recent thing, it becomes the Tower of Babel. All the language gets messed up. I've watched the language get messed up. I've watched where people can't talk to each other anymore. I've watched where people think they can build something up better than the thing was before, and how it just topple on top of them in 10 seconds. And it's hard. It's hard. It's not so easy to do what Joseph Smith did if you think that it was just pulled out of a hat.
Yeah, exactly. No pun intended, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
under the banner of heaven is Jonathan Streeter and I mean, we talk a lot of this stuff. He thinks it's okay, or he's going to give it a chance. I think it's terrible so far. I don't like it. That is not Utah. That's how we talk in Utah. Okay. And I know the consultant personally on that. I know that that we didn't talk like that unless there's something weird going on.
I was in Utah County at that time. So, I mean, I didn't live there, but I guess I did. I was at BYU, but it's bizarre to me when I would listen to that. I'm like, what are these? The Amish? Are these from like the 18th century or something? I don't.
Heavenly Father knows I didn't talk like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
it's kind of odd.
Yeah, it's beyond odd, and then you can always see the conflations that they're making, because the whole thing is going to conflate this idea that every Mormon should double think if they're just as bad as an extremist or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they're obviously pushing toward that. It's always what the push is. And I think that the whole concept comes from academia. And there's a second thing that comes from academia in that. One of the other things Foucault was very famous for bringing to our world is 1619 project style history. Foucault was the person who brought up the concept that we can just kind of go reinvent and change and tweak and twist around history a little bit for activistic reasons. And I think Hollywood always did that for telling a good story. But nowadays, if you get into the academia and what's called new historicism that came out of that, it's not much better than these Hollywood things are about. I mean, you could point it under the banner of heaven. They're trying to paint Mormons that way, but they're doing it everywhere. There's this, I've been talking a lot about that Julia Child movie show that just came out, and they've got all this stuff like she had a black producer and they're all racist to the black producer. And you look it up and that producer didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, why are you guys doing this story of painting Mr. Rogers and the people who put Mr. Rogers on the air as people who obviously were racist to this producer that they hired? And then there's a whole episode about Julia Childs going and learning about trans people at a trans community. And you're like, what is this? They even like write in something that she had a tryst in college with a lesbian, and you look it up and it's all just imaginary. And like, what am I even watching here? And I think, I mean, I hope people see the Julia Child show and go, I'm not watching anything about Julia Child. And then you go over to Under the Banner of Heaven and you go, am I watching 1980s Utah?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, you know, the whole lived experience thing is a big part of postmodernism. Yeah. And it's like my truth. there's no objective truth. This is my truth. But there's always a truth, right? I mean, it's even if you're rewriting history, you're trying to create a new truth.
Yeah.
So you may be pulling away from the original truth, but now you're trying to create a new truth. What about someone else's interpretation of that?
Yeah. Well, they absolutely say straightforwardly the Foucauldian way, that because Foucault, if you read a Foucault book, all it really is just a long gish gallop of historical things. And if you get any historian who goes and looks into it and he's kind of just trying to make the point of like, this happened, and this happened, this happened, and well, who's to say what's what? And people go and look into his long list and they find out that he just kind of pulled a lot of it and said a lot of it and made claims and a lot of it that just weren't true. But that's where the starting point of all that came. And so then you get someone like Lindsay Hansen Park who starts a blog about polygamy, and she just reads stuff in polygamy, and you have a lot of things like I think it was Jim Bennett or another one of your friends posted about this lady Biddy something who went over to California, and she was a slave, and she was a slave who got freed, and she had a Mormon owner, but then Brigham Young told them that they couldn't have slaves anymore when they went over to California. But if you read the ex-Mormon story of that, it's this lady was enslaved by her Mormon slavers, and you read the whole thing, and it's got, I mean, they criticize the positive spins on stuff, but you become an ex-Mormon and you think, wow, we've come into the world of truthiness here. No, we've come into the world of just as much myth. Yeah. But you're going to make it your cynical myth.
Well, and that's kind of like, I mean, going back to the idea of what was going on and what's going on in the as you say, in the post-Mormon world or the atheist world. By the way, how much atheism is in the post-Mormon world?
Well, it's getting more and more popular. John DeLynn wouldn't announce it and still doesn't announce it, even though he obviously is. And I kind of made a joke. I just made a joke last night on the Midnight Mormons that, so they bring on John Larson all the time, and Kara's on it, and they talk about being determinists and the Sam Harris stuff that they believe. I mean, it gets so wonky because they don't believe in free will and all that sorts of stuff. But I joke and say that they sound like 2003, 2004 Sam Harris atheists. Like, they don't realize that the whole atheism plus movement happened. Even, in fact, I've even seen John DeLynn be able to interview some people who were around there, and they get coy about what happened to that movement. He asked Cara Santa Maria about it. He asked another guy from Street Epistemology about it. And they said, what happened to that movement? It was so big and it was so strong. And they play coy and go, I don't know what happened. We know what happened. Everybody knows what happened. It got woke and it blew up.
Well, isn't that, so that's an example that happens, I think, everywhere. This is my concern, honestly, for the church is, and then again, this is the whole wokeism, but we're kind of focusing a little bit more on the postmodern angle of it. But when there's no objective truth, and there's your lived experience, there's my lived experience, there's nothing for us to anchor on then whatsoever. Yeah. Then all you end up is creating tribes that people agree with that lived experience, and then all it is what Foucault would totally agree with. It's all a power struggle. That's all you end up with. And it's my truth over your truth, or your truth over my truth. Who's going to win?
Yeah. And then now with intersectionality, it's the oppressive one is the most oppressed one. It's the inversion of it, which Nietzsche actually predicted himself. But I'd say most, if not all, well, because of course you don't know who's been chased out, but online ex-Mormonism is almost purely atheistic, woke, postmodern stuff. But then again, of course, not every practitioner is a preacher. Not every preacher is a theologian. Not every, there people know different levels of it, but they're I'd say it's almost 100%. And that's, you see a lot of people talk about it, and I think it's absolutely true. I've heard pushback on it, but I think it's absolutely true. It's like an academic type religion. It's an academic atheistic religion, and it is congealing into a real thing that is its own actual thing.
That's what I call it. I call it the religion of academia. I really think
real.
That's a good way to describe it. I think that's what it is. I do think there's a conversion process. I think there's rituals. I think it's, everything is, it's very demanding. It requires your heart, might, mind, and strength.
Shun the non-believer.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very much that way. And I think, I think it has been in the past where our culture in the U.S. has come out of things where you did have, you still had an anchor in the classics, right? You still had an anchor in, I'll even say this, stories, nursery rhymes, right? Bedtime stories, just things that get repeated over and over again. And I forget what I was going with this now, but
Stephen Hicks called it that there was generations of postmodernists. You had first generation, second generation, third generation. We're on third generation now, and the first generation people actually were themselves trained in the classics, and now by like the third generation of these types of professors, they've only been trained in postmodernism, and they don't know anything about the classics, and except you go and talk to somebody about Kant or whoever, and they're just going to tell you how they were racist. Shakespeare was racist on this day and in this paragraph, but did he write anything else? I don't know. And
it's all interpretation. Now, I wish I remember where I was going with that last minute. I can't think of where I was going with it, but so where do you think this all ends?
Well, the weird thing to me is how much the religious side is starting to play into it, and it's so strange to me because they just don't know, like I know, how much they want to take them down. It's real. Like they if you watch Under the Banner of Heaven, or if you really read into any one of these concepts or ideas, there's no placating them by saying we're going to play along a little bit. I call it Maoist, and it is Maoist. Like they're pushing for a year zero. Like, you got to get rid of the four olds. You got to get rid of the old traditions, the old books, the old stuff. And the only way Mormonism could ever rebaptize itself is if it got rid of everything and started at year zero as the new, there's no way it can redeem itself and keep the Book of Mormon, or, and it seems strange to me that the religious side thinks that they're going to let them do the dialectic or whatever, like half play along. Like there's no all the way there. It's you're going to go all the way with this, or we're going to continue pushing and taking and complaining and poking and conflating the average police officer, good Mormon guy with the Laffertys. And it's in the game book. And so how they're going to join up, it really drives me crazy too, because any single time that you give into that, people like Delenn and all that, they take credit for it, and I don't think it's them doing it at all. I don't think Delenn makes the church go more woke. I think it's kind of more a larger societal pressure that Delenn's under himself. And I don't know if it's just BYU or whatnot. I don't know who's pushing back. Myself, I think there could be a lot of different people who would circle back or reunite or try to think things out if we saw that the rock was there, of something that was going to stand up to whatever the heck is going on. But we see in the SBC that there's all sorts of weirdness in the world of Catholicism. There's all sorts of weirdness, and each one of them has their factions. I'm not saying the SBC, the Southern Baptist Church, is all the way gone, but it's mostly gone.
It opened up the dam is the problem. It's
yeah. And the Catholic Church, and especially with I mean, that's been going on forever, going back with liberation theology,
South
back
America,
in
especially
South America and all that stuff. My girlfriend's a Venezuelan refugee. One of the other reasons I do not like Marxism, but she knows all about her church being taken over by Marxists, and she's a Catholic, and the Mormon Church. The fact that BYU does it a little bit is well, I'm glad you're putting a petition out, and I know that there's people there who are not going to stand for it, you know, or they're going to be brave about it. But I also know good Mormons who start going along with it, you know, or start thinking that it sounds like it makes sense, or it sounds like I should kind of I don't want to be on the wrong side of this, you know, and they start playing
wrong side of history. It's a common one.
And they're especially worried because they get, you know, whatever Mormon past thrown in front of them. I've long said as an ex-Mormon, for me, is like, it'll get this one right, and it's a total redemption. That's in my view, you know. But
you're talking about the Hegelian dialectic a little bit. Let's kind of finish off with that a little bit. You know, you've got this idea from you know, it goes beyond Hegel, but what he does is he basically says, look, this is part of a future. This is almost a natural future progression for humanity, which is
super state.
Yeah, toward a super state that is going to be, of course, the utopia, right? And so you've got we have a thesis here, which is usually just what the status quo is right now, and then you have an antithesis that goes against that, and then you kind of end up somewhere in the middle. It's almost like a compromise toward progress, you know, depending on how you define progress. And then it moves, right? So now you move, and now you go beyond that, and there's almost a new thesis after that gels for a while, and then you have another antithesis which goes out to the future, let's say, and then you pull it again into the middle here. It's interesting because this is, in a lot of ways, the way you might look at progressivism, the term progressivism, right? But I had this up here. I was just reading this. This is just off of Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. But it says here, progressivism is a political philosophy in support of social reform, based on the idea of progress in which advancements in science, technology, economic development, and social organization are vital to the improvement of the human condition. And this was all brought about during the Age of Enlightenment. What's so odd now is that is where you get progressivism, but postmodernism wants to destroy all that.
Yeah.
Postmodernism is post-enlightenment. It wants to go against the Enlightenment. It wants to go against science. It wants to go against technology and break all of these things down. We're moving into a very odd time philosophically, where you have a conflation of, you know, the Marxism and the postmodernism and the Identitarianism all brought together, and then this long movement of progressivism that's been in place is all of a sudden it's almost like there's a tidal wave that's overcome it, or in the US anyway, of this postmodern critical theory thought that is coming out of academia that is changing everything. And what I see is a drastic change in the demographics because of this. I have a lot of people on this podcast where, you know, I'm probably, I don't know, I think 70, 30, 80, 20, something like that, as far as conservative to left leaning. Right. But I have a lot of people that, you know, they want to go after the libs, you know, or they think this is all just on the left or whatever. And it is on the left, but it's not liberal. It's not a liberal thing, right? It's not a traditional liberal movement at all. It's anti-liberal.
Have you heard of? Sorry, go ahead.
No, and so you've got a lot of people. You know, I'm involved with an organization called FAIR, and you look at their board of advisors, and they're completely against CRT, but most of their board of advisors are on the left, right? Because they're classical liberals. And so they're fighting against this. And so I see this movement of left-leaning classical liberals that are thinking, what am I going to do here? Because this is no longer what I thought progressivism was. and I don't really have a home. And then on the other side, you have kind of this country club Republican conservative guy that's still kind of elitist on an elite level, right? Whether it's academic or it's social or economic, and they're like pulling the other way. They're like moving the other way on this. Labor, same thing. Labor's moving right over to the right, and so there's these massive shifts. I just see this, and I'm kind of blabbing along here, but I just see this whole change of this tidal wave coming over progressivism is just almost an axial moment of the demographics that are shifting. Elon Musk just put something out about his politics and how he's moved because everything else is moving.
Yeah.
And so there's just all these interesting shifts that are coming from these new philosophies.
It's going to get weirder. It's going to get weirder thanks to a type of postmodernism or the dialectic or even critical theorists. It's hard to parse out. We've done it on Jonathan Streeter's channel, but there's the critical theorist movement, the Frankfurt School movement, and the postmodernist movement. And that's where you get people huffing and puffing at you because they really were kind of separate, even though they had a lot of the same ideas. And it was Crenshaw. It was around that time in Marcuse that they met up. But they were separate back in the 60s. But have you heard of things like the Dark Enlightenment movement?
No.
Things are going to get weirder. There's a right-wing postmodern movement. Have you heard of like Mencius Moldbug? And
yes, I have heard that.
It's that guy, Curtis Yarvin, and a lot of people say Alexander Dugin, that person who was the philosopher, consultant of Putin, is a Dark Enlightenment type, and they're using postmodern ideas, they're using dialectical ideas out of the Frankfurt School to be critical of the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment movement, to move beyond that to say we need to go back to they'll say, but back to sort of pre-modern monarchism. And it's getting a big following, it's getting a big movement, and it comes from that they do embrace, strangely enough, Adorno and Horkheimer and maybe a little bit Marcuse, but they'll even embrace Foucault and those types of ideas, and Hegel, and they like the dialectic and they like speaking about that sorts of stuff because it's moving through everything. But that's a whole other different movement. But what Marx did and why it's all Marxian, because it's all really Hegelianism, but you could say Hegel was the guy who thought it was just kind of supposed to happen. We'll happen into this big state. Marx is the one who said we got to, through conflict theory, like you said, re-put up the new thesis, and we got to make it happen. We got to push it. And that's kind of the simple little thing that everybody learns, that they're able to use to go move into, to push into something, to push people over. I used to call it's like it becomes a little bit like there's this thing called the puppy fallacy. There's 20 puppies and you say you want all 20 puppies live, and I want to kill 10 puppies. So it's not a compromise to say, let's kill 15 puppies, what I mean? But the dialectic is the second you agree to that and say, fine, we'll kill 5 puppies. We agree. Then I re-up it the next second. Mm-hmm. We need to kill all the puppies. The very next second, the very second after you agree to it. So 20 puppies, 10 puppies, we agree to 15. Okay. We need to kill all the puppies. Yeah, and that's just how it moves. That's the conflict theory. That's the dialectic of just constantly pushing for your direction, of just re-upping the thing immediately. And I'd say the left, the entirety of the left, the postmodernists, the Frankfurt School, and who've trained most of the people who've come up to create this kind of humanities religion, and it has taken over the humanities. It's taken over the humanities. I think I could be pretty sure to say it's probably taken over even BYU's humanities departments, like especially certain aspects of them, like probably the literature department. I haven't been there to know, but I'm just hunching, and especially from some of your reporting. But it was already done at the University of Utah 15 years ago. It was already over, That's how they moved in. That's how they moved. People say the virus, but that's how the virus works. It's just
and the virus is active. And that's what people need to realize. The virus is active. This is not a matter of appeasement. This is not a matter of
you give into anything, and the next thing is the next second is the next thesis.
Yeah, so it's a process and it's an attitude, right? It's a process, an attitude, and a conversion. So that's what people think. It's like, okay, well, maybe we just need to compromise on this a little bit right here, and then this will solve everything. And that's not, you don't understand. That's not the goal. That's not what the issue is. There is no end. There is no end.
There's no end. There's always a new thesis. That dialectic is also the same way that they try to throw sand in your eyes that each of the new theories is completely its own different thing. Because anytime so the joining up of postmodernism and critical theory was a dialectic.
Sure.
They got smashed together. But the second you have the new thing, it's just such a new baptized thing that it has nothing to do with the old thing. You're crazy for even mentioning or even saying that has anything to do with the old thing. That's kind of one of the religious tenets of how they throw sand in the eyes, that they're not just doing more Marxism. And that's why since Marxism, it's just been reiterations of Marxism by different people down different paths. And each one is the magical new thing. And it's so new. How dare you say it's Marxism? You're crazy.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, Chris, appreciate your time on this. Let's continue to talk. I think I'm heading up to Utah here in about a month, so maybe we can get together again and talk a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to end on a hopeless note, because I do think there is hope. I think there's stuff there's people.
No, I think there's definitely hope. I think that there's, to me, it's, and a lot of people will listen to this and they're going to be like, their head spinning, right? But I think there has to be education that's brought out on this. People have to know what this is. They have to delve into it, because it's a whole new world that's coming. There's a whole new world. This is not just left against right. This is not conservative against liberal. This is not the world you're used to. And until people are a little more immersed into all this and really get into it, they're not going to understand what's happening. Yeah. So the hope to me is you've got to learn, you got to know what's going on, and then you have to have the tools to navigate it.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, any one of us can fall down it or go down it. I mean, I did a little bit. I never really bought. I mean, I remember hearing some Judith Butler in 2000 and them saying that my gender was just a performance, and just, what? And that sounded really strange at that time. And it just, some things just hit you wrong and they don't make sense. But there's been a level of me of hoping that places maybe like the church, and I know that you have faith and trust that they will be the thing to stand up to it. But when I see any organization that's making principled stands, I mean, I just look at it and say, well, that's where I want to line up with.
Yeah, good deal. Well, hey, appreciate your time. We will talk again soon.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.